For Polity in Johannesburg, I'm Darlene Creamer. Author Ted Botha joins me to discuss his book, Hollywood on the Veld, When Movie Mayhem Gripped the City of Gold. Your book chronicles the remarkable life of Isidore William Schlesinger, who arrived in South Africa from America in 1894 with nothing but a fob watch from his mother, only to eventually live in a luxurious penthouse atop Johannesburg's Carlton Hotel. Can you tell us about his early life, his beginnings in Cape Town, and his move to Johannesburg?
In 1894, when he came out here, he was a young man and he didn't have anything in New York. He left behind his family and he didn't stay in Cape Town for long. And he had, as you said, he had nothing except this fob that his mother had given him. He went to Joburg. He wanted to be in Joburg. And he didn't really know what to do when he got there, and he finally found himself. It's a long story how he got there, but he went into real estate first and insurance, and he made a lot of money within a very short time. And by the time he got to 1913, he had become a very wealthy man. And for some reason, he liked to live in a hotel on the top floor of the best hotel in Johannesburg, probably in Africa, the Carlton Hotel. And there were things happening in the entertainment industry in Joburg in that all the theaters were going bankrupt. And that also had its own history in that Johannesburg was known for entertainment because all these miners had lots of money to spend. So they wanted to go to the theater, they wanted to go to roller skating rinks, they wanted to go to boxing fights, they wanted to go to the racing track, they wanted to go to brothels, wherever. So there was this huge theater circuit, and they were all going bankrupt because they had a lot of overheads and theater groups coming out that they had to pay for and all competing against each other. So one after the other, they started saying, we don't have any money left. And Schlesinger saw a gap here and he started buying up the theaters for very low prices. And soon after he did that, or probably at the same time that he did that, he decided to make movies. He wanted to have movies to show in the theaters as well as the theater, the vaudeville, the musicals, the Shakespeare, all of those other things that were going on. But movies themselves were very, very early in their lifespan. And, Hollywood was still farmland in Los Angeles. No one in the world had ever heard of this place called Hollywood. And yet Schlesinger here decided that he was going to make his own movies in South Africa and create his own Hollywood, which, it's hard to believe that he did something like that today, 110 years later. But I mean, he was doing something crazy and incredible. And, that was where it started in 1913 when he had this idea to make this Hollywood in Johannesburg and to make these huge movies that were equal or better than anything that had been made in the world before.
And Schlesinger was described as secretive, rarely giving interviews and avoiding the spotlight. How were you able to uncover and piece his story together?
It was very difficult. I mean, I heard about Schlesinger when I was very young and living in Pretoria, and I've always loved movies. So, I mean, that was really what drove me in the story, was that I loved movies, and I'd never kind of related South Africa to being a movie-making country. It's like going to, I don't know, some non-mining country in the world and saying, oh, they actually once upon a time produced lots of gold. So, I mean, for me, it was this amazing story of this man who had done movies in South Africa in this early age. So I started digging probably about 20 years ago. And I discovered when I started digging that there wasn't much available on this man. And then I discovered that he really didn't like to be publicized. So even though he had interests in business and in real estate and in agriculture, and he had many, many, many businesses, and movies was just one of them, he just didn't like to be publicized. So it was a difficult search. I found little snippets in newspapers here from way back then, and maybe a paragraph in a book here and a book there. So it was a lot of digging and often finding nothing. But in the end, if you stick at it for long enough, you'll find stuff. And so I did, which makes the story.
In 1913, after a string of business ventures, he entered the movie industry, a chaotic, booming, and unpredictable field at the time. Despite the risks, Schlesinger jumped in with little hesitation. Please share more about the movie industry during that era and how he became involved.
So the movie industry in 1913 is like 110 years ago, was mostly based in Europe, and very strong German, French, Danish, Swedish movie industry. This was before the First World War, and all of these people were servicing the American, British markets, other markets around the world. But when the First World War came, America was kind of given free rein to carry on with its movie industry while the other countries kind of went to war, and it made hay while it could. And so during those first years of the First World War, 1914, 1915, 16, they boomed in America. And that was what Schlesinger was kind of following. He thought South Africa could be like America. It had a lot of the same elements. You know, Johannesburg was like Los Angeles. It had the same climate, the same geography. It was built on gold versus oil, and it had a great climate for making movies. And so he decided to make movies like they were doing in America. And as American movies became bigger and longer and more showy, Schlesinger did the same thing, which is quite crazy for that era. I mean, it's not like he came in 1950 after the movie industry had been going for 30, 40 years. It was like right at the beginning. And it's really difficult to kind of explain to people how amazing this was, unless they know where the movie industry was back then. It was like this in its infancy. So everything you see today started there. So this industry that we're so fascinated by today all started at that moment. And he was right there, and he saw, you know, he's very smart and he was very prescient. He knew what a good movie was, you know, and the movies that he didn't make, even though there were like 40 movies that he made in South Africa during this first 5-6 years, you know, some of them became movies that have been remade over and over again, like King Solomon's Mines and The Blue Lagoon. And so, you know, he had a real good idea of what would make a movie. And I mean, he was a businessman. He wasn't a movie maker. So in that sense, he was also far, far, I think, more talented than the movie producers, the famous movie producers of Hollywood, because he was kind of handling a whole bunch of other companies that had nothing to do with entertainment at the same time that he was handling a movie empire, which they weren't doing. So that makes him even more incredible.
Schlesinger's movie productions were known for their sheer scale and their controversies. One example is the recreation of the Battle of Blood River for his film Winning a Continent. Please, can you tell us about this?
So I think from the earliest time that he was making movies, he decided to go big, which wasn't normal for back then. I mean, you know, you think of spectacle movies now, and I mean, they're a dime a dozen. You know, everyone's making these huge movies with big budgets, and it's, you know, it wasn't done back then. For, you know, until like 1913, most movies were like 15 minutes long. They were short, little black and white things done with a painted background and not very professional. And here, about 1914-15, one or two American movies were made, and Italian movies, like they made one or two that were huge, big things. They went out on location. You know, the Italians made movies about great old classic adventures and Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants, and they did the real thing. And the Americans came out with a movie called The Birth of a Nation, which was a very controversial movie because it had some racist elements to it. And, you know, Schlesinger wanted to make movies in South Africa that copied these American and Italian spectacles. And considering the size of the South African market at the time, which really is what he was making them for, it's like, it was a pinprick in the world. It was like this tiny, tiny, tiny market. And yet he wanted to equal these great spectacles, of which there had been maybe half a dozen made in the history of movies. And he wanted to make the same thing. And he was looking for historical movies at first to make about South Africa. And of course, the first one he thought of a couple. I mean, wanted to make a movie about Rhodes. He wanted to make a movie about Dingaan and Shako, which also was incredible. And then he settled for his first movie about the Great Trek. So there was the culminates with the Battle of Blood River in 1858. And that led to a very political, exciting, controversial shoot which was done outside Johannesburg, and that you'll read about in the book is kind of led to a lot of chaos.
Schlesinger went on to produce major movies, as you mentioned, like King Solomon's Mines and The Blue Lagoon. He later married his leading actress, Mabel May, and they had a son, John, whose godfather was Jan Smuts. Talk to us about his legacy, both his contributions to cinema and personally.
I mean, it's hard to say that he's got a legacy because nobody really knows about him. I hope this book might change it. But, there's no aspect of entertainment in South Africa that you can look at today that wasn't started by him. I mean, he got involved in radio from the earliest times. He bought some bankrupt radio stations or going bankrupt radio stations and put them together in what he called the African Broadcasting Corporation, which he based on the BBC. And in the 1930s, he sold that to the government, which became the SABC. I mean, the theaters, he had all the theaters. He built these massive movie palaces around the country, which many of them have been demolished, but I mean, they were better than anything you could find or as good as anything you could find on Broadway or the West End of London. Advertising started. He had some great ideas in early movie advertising. He had an advertising company. Television, he was thinking of going into television in 1927 when it was first invented, and decided, while he was going to stay out of it for a while. So, I mean, every part of entertainment today has a throwback to Schlesinger, although most people don't know that. And I mean, there are many aspects of his life that maybe when people read about in the book, they'll realize how his tentacles reached into many, many parts of society. I mean, his friendship with Jan Smuts, much about that went uncatalogued. Smuts became his son's godfather. He regularly met with Smuts, apparently, according to an unofficial biography of Schlesinger that was never published. His wife was a very good friend of Schlesinger's wife, Mabel May. And there's connections that he had with a lot of politicians back in the day. So, I mean, as far as his legacy goes, sadly, what you read in the book is probably the start of maybe what will become his legacy. I don't know.
Finally, the story is a powerful reminder that South Africa has the ability to compete at a world-class level. Please, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think, as I said in the beginning, Schlesinger came to South Africa and saw this potential to be equivalent of an America in Africa. And I mean, he was an expansionist. He said that in one of the few interviews that he did. And he saw all the same elements that he saw in America. So what he would do is he would go back to America every year and he would get ideas from America and then bring them back to South Africa and then try and adapt them into his own kind of creation in South Africa, which is a country he really, really loved. He was very passionate about South Africa, about the people, about the countryside. And I think he had this vision of South Africa becoming much, much bigger in its ideas, in the things that it did. I mean, we've all seen this in many things that, like we've seen today, the past, like how many years, you see ideas coming out of South Africa that are world class, and often they don't get the kind of platform that they should have. And you go to England or you go to France or you go to America and you think, geez, but we've got that and we've got better stuff than that. And so I think Schlesinger took this early on, and the movie industry that he created was an example of how that can be done, and he wanted to do it. And yeah, so I think it's a great parable for South Africa today, like you can reach for the stars because we can do it.
That was Ted Botha discussing his book, Hollywood on the Veld.